Saita. Um, so we'll start with our next session. So we have a session on algorithmic governance. We have Miss Aditi Chaturvedi she's the head of legal Koan Advisory, and she'll be moderating this session. As panelist, we have Eun Chang Choi, and he is a legal scholar in the area of AI ethics and governance. We have Nidhi Singh, she's the senior project officer, Center for Communication Governance, NLU Delhi. I welcome you all. Aditi, over to you.
Hi, good morning. I hope I'm audible.
Yeah, you're audible.
Right. So hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Aditi Chaturvedi, and thank you, Shraddhanjali, for the introduction. I will be moderating today's discussion, and today's panel will focus on ethics in AI and specifically on algorithmic governance within it. Just to give a small background, trust is the key to widespread adoption and success of AI. And it is for this reason that AI products must adhere to the highest standards of ethics and prevailing regulations. A lot of AI will be interacting with the society in the times to come, and it already is. And this is why we have to focus more and more on developing more ethics, figuring out how we can accept some sort of common principles that can guide its design and systems. So to talk more on this today, we have the pleasure of having with us Mr. Eun Chang. He is a Korean scholar focused on interplay of emerging technology, data, intellectual property. He holds a degree in law from Yale Law School, and he's accomplished so much that I'm not even sure where to begin. These include a number of publications, teaching assignments. He sits on the editorial board of MIT, and he's been serving on Korean Internet Governance Alliance. And we also have with us an equally accomplished scholar with us, Ms. Nidhi Singh. She's a project officer in technology and society team at the Center for Communication Governance at NLU Delhi. She's worked on AI ethics, privacy, internet governance, emerging tech. She also holds a degree in law and a degree in LLM also from National University of Advanced Studies, Kochi, and International Law University, College London, respectively. So before we begin, I just want to quickly explain the format. First, I would like to invite Mr. Eun Chang to set the context. So for first 15 minutes, he will give a background information about the issue, what AI ethics is, what algorithmic governance is. After that, I will ask a few questions, which are open to both panelists, and we will clock this for about 30 minutes, and thereafter we can have the audience discussion. Is that fine? All right. So, Mr. Eun Chang, would you like to, I invite you to please explain to us what are we talking about, give us more context for the benefit of the audience. Please take over.
Hello, everyone. My name is Choi from South Korea. I'm just connected from Seoul. It's a very pleasure to be here today. The algorithmic governance is quite popular and very important topic with regard to internet governance also, because as you know, so many leading big tech giants, including Facebook, Amazon.com, and WhatsApp, and including many social media application with TikTok like that. So many social media companies try to use the algorithm, because algorithm is quite a key concept to get the money. And because how they get the money, because they send the targeted advertisement to the very specific group of the people. And then sometimes, as you see, there's some the last presidential election in the United States, there's some kind of targeted advertisement in politics, kind of the very much undemocratic outcome has incurred, and then behind of this algorithm, we must mention about some data. As you already know, in the UK, Cambridge Analytica also provided so many data set to the Trump camp, but it happened everywhere in South Korea, in India, or some other countries. That means some kind of the illegal gathering of the data set without any specific consent of the data holders, and then that data set of data can be used for some very much misleading political campaign, that they're going to be a very negative effect on democratic situation in any other countries. I'm Korean, and I sometimes look into some Indian politics. I found that this very similar issue has been caused in India also, in Sri Lanka. I believe this it is not going to be very much exaggeration to say that Asian countries is kind of victimized countries that as because of big tech platforms manipulate so many algorithms to get their own profit making. That's why we should take account of this, and then we should discuss about how we can cope with this. And then I personally know several people in Myanmar, and then I heard that in Myanmar, so many nationalist violence and killings, massacre has been caused by some Facebook. And at the time, Facebook admitted that there's only one language to understand Myanmar language. That means global platform is really, really a the pill short of the perfect management. Yeah, the coup. Yeah, Myanmar also have coup, but I told them a little bit of several more people, maybe 2014, 15. And then I think that kind of a problem is not going to be ended very soon, because the big tech companies is the biggest power of the algorithmic governance. They own manipulation, they own statistics, they own tactics. It's really, really powerful. And then only one or two users cannot handle that kind of the problem. And then I'm going to move to a little bit more about that problem, because I want to stress that with regard to internet governance, first of all, we must recognize the problem, how much algorithm is practically and realistically get into our life and our situation, everyday life, is very important. And then secondly, I'd like to suggest that internet users must aware and must understand how can we cope with this problem with the algorithmic literacy. This is a youth IGF. Youth IGF is very important because under the 30-year-old, many activists and lawyers and public interest policymakers, they're going to get together, and they should encourage the algorithmic governance with regard to algorithmic literacy. Without knowledge of how algorithms working, and then what's the problem of the algorithmic modeling, what's the problem of the gathering of data set, we cannot handle this. First of all, I should stress that algorithmic governance should be based on the algorithmic literacy. But I found that in South Korea and in Japan and many Asian countries, not many people get hold of the what means algorithmic literacy, because even though we get the benefit of the algorithmic functionality every day, for example, spam filtering or kind of the self-driving car, and kind of some more AI generated some images for NFT or some commerce. And then when you go to shopping, we also learn many of the we get the benefit of the many of the algorithms. But the problem is that we should focus on how algorithm automated policy making or automated decision making, in particular in some kind of the public expenditure or public spending, it could cause some kind of fairness problem. That's why we should focus on this. I try to a little bit focus on allow me just a little bit about. Oh yeah. Okay. Okay. Could you see this slide?
Yes, it's visible.
Okay. Let me explain a little bit, just a little, because algorithmic governance should understand there's so many functionality of the AI, product detection, and the human resources supply chain. It's going to be very positive one, but the other side, there's a negative one. We just focus on negative one. And
I'm sorry,
positive,
Mr. Eun Chang, I think it's gone. I can't see the screen.
oh yeah.
Yeah.
But it's okay.
All right.
Could you see this credit score? Oh yeah, okay. Oh, I just. Oh, could you see my slide?
Not yet.
Okay. I'm sorry. Oh, this is some technology issue.
Yes.
Could you see this? Okay,
Yes.
good. Oh, some kind of elusive question is that AI is not just tool for automation, but it affects the social institution decide human lives, and then automatic decision making. So when they malfunction in hospital, some Black or marginalized people will face a very less resource of the doctors or cares. There's a problem, and then how can we make some fair decision without algorithm bias? I already know that maybe 15 minutes ago, the Professor Babu also mentioned about the algorithm governance and the bias and black box problem, and then here's I'm a little bit wondering about how many participants of this session should understand about black box problem. The black box problem is that it's not intended. It's very inherited and natural, because AI system making very much complicated. Because there are so many parameters, and even engineers try to their own best, they cannot understand how is working. And then that, in other words, if there's a problem, they cannot find what's the problem inside of there. That's a core of the black box problem. And then if it is happen in some kind of spam filtering, it's okay. But if it's happen in some hospitalization or some social benefit sharing, it's going to be a big problem. That means some aspect of the black box problem can kill the people's life. I want to stress about that. And then when it comes to hiring, also algorithm is non-neutral. It's because it reflects some kind of the gender bias and racial bias and some color decision. It's all kind of related. And then we are at the Internet Governance Forum. In the Internet Governance Forum, there's some Tim Berners-Lee also mentioned about some algorithm accountability. Wow, but as a moderator already mentioned that we don't understand, and we're not sure about how much internet platform going to implement their own some self-regulation effectively. We're not sure about it, but how can they make a decision transparently? But nothing to say about some fairness. But they just gathered so many users' data, million or trillion of the user data without any consent. In South Korea also, there's going to be very much problematic, and the South Korean authority also indicted Facebook. Why did you get the data without any consent? And then but maybe Korean authority will going to issue some kind of penalty, but it's not much big money because of the big tech company like the Facebook. They got a big big bunch of money. I think the penalty is not much effective method to implement their own transparency and then unbiased decision makings. This is a problem. The automated system already deeply is getting side of our life in the social institution, as a lawyer, I just want to focus on the social institution in hospital and courtroom and the public spending like this. Because that kind of public institution or social institution very much relate to some marginalized people, poor people, and very vulnerable people, and some handicapped people. That's a problem. How can we also, and the gender bias was very important. And I want to hear today some kind of gender bias problem inside of in India, but it happened also in South Korea many times. And how can we get hold of the algorithm accountability? As you know, the European countries always suggest some AI regulation based on risk analysis. The problem is that risk analysis is not much neutral, because risk perception is different. Somebody understand some AI chatbot is not much risky, but face recognition technology to get hold of the whole kind of the data set from the street, on cars, and then stores and buildings. The face recognition technology get hold of the many data without any consent. That's very dangerous. European countries.
Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Eun Chang. We're just running out of time. Could we wrap this up in a minute? Like
yeah. Oh, okay.
We've crossed 15 minutes.
Yeah, thank you.
So sorry.
When it comes to some algorithmic governance, I want to stress that explainability and accuracy and accountability. But from the legal perspective, some victimized people try to get into some algorithm. The company defend with the tool of the trade secret. Because this algorithm is protected by trade secret, we cannot open this. How can we get into there? Nobody knows. That's why I just suggest that if you feel uncomfortable about how algorithm is working inside of the platform, or how the automatic decision making get into our life, how they shape our life, we need to some authority who have some power to get into the auditable, some algorithm auditable. The auditability is very important, but many companies just try to defend this trade secret, but we need to evade this. It's a common method for all countries, including South Korea and India, but it's a wrong way to go. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Eun Chang. That was super helpful. We touched upon many issues that we probably won't be able to cover because they're so detailed, thoroughly examined, and it's a very complex issue. You touched upon the gender bias problem. Maybe I could invite Ms. Nidhi Singh to give us some examples of gender bias examples in India, and where do you think the root cause is? Given the revelations that we have off late by the big tech of how they target, women, and the amount of misogyny women are subjected to because of algorithmic, the way the algorithms function. Could you we should start with a problem to make this a little interesting. Some case studies. Both of you can come in with Ms. Nidhi. Maybe you could start first.
Yes. Hi. Nice to see you again, Aditi, Ihita. Nice to meet you, Shraddhanjali. So I think that I really lucked out going after Mr. Eun Chang and also our previous speaker, because you covered a lot of the points I was going to say. So I think at the outset, what I wanted to start with is that clearly, depending upon your country, everybody's at a very different stage of your journey in algorithmic governance. So for example, like if I were to take India as a case study, I do not think that we have quite as nuanced conversations, legally speaking, considering we're still working on our data protection law. You have a data protection law, you have intermediary liability, then I think eventually we get to some sort of algorithmic governance. As and when that happens, non-personal data protection comes in. Going back to your question, Aditi, I think, can you clarify, do you mean the use of algorithms and how they cause gender bias in India?
Yeah, sure. Like something to contextualize this, give us some examples of how serious it could be, and then maybe we can move on to, ways to regulate it and why it's so tough to regulate it.
Yeah, so I think that Off the top of my head, the examples I can think of which do sort of come into play mostly relate to private players. So in that context, we'd mostly be talking about things like Facebook, Twitter. There have been a lot of examples of takedown of speech, which may be like takedown of speech, especially by people who are writing out against, say, misogynistic or like anti-feminist conduct. Or there have been a lot of examples where speech that should have been taken down has not been taken down on all of these platforms. That is one of the sort of primary, I think, case studies that I can think of. A lot of this also, I think, as Mr. Eun Chang pointed out, and our previous panel pointed out, stems from the fact that content in regional language is usually not moderated as well. There's not enough resources in this area. So that also leads to like a widespread of, say, hate speech or misogyny on these sorts of platforms. So I think that's probably something that is happening right now.
Yeah. Taking that forward, Mr. Eun Chang, you spoke about, difficulties in algorithmic governance, and you highlighted the black box problem. And I believe you wanted to talk a little bit, explain us a little bit about why that's so difficult. Could you, generally just talking about, we have the moral and legal obligation of the state, and we expect the governments to, regulate on this topic. And then we have the industries on one hand, which also have moral and legal obligations, and there seems to be a movement towards understanding how we should agree on some principles for making this entire algorithm more transparent. But how do you view this development? Do you think there's going to be any movement on this? You can touch upon some issues with the algorithmic complexities here.
I think, to be frankly speak with you, I believe many of them recognize this problem. I believe, including some software engineers and including internet companies, even policymakers already acknowledge of this problem inside of AI functionality. The problem is that, to the broad perspective, every advanced country just on the rat race, they wanted to go to advance of AI industry, because Vladimir Putin, Russian president, told that the country who control AI, the country will rule the world. And everybody knows that. That's why, even though there's some serious concern about the ethical issue or some face recognition issue for the refugees, they cannot protect their own privacy. And there's so many serious issues of gender bias in everywhere. But policymakers or lawmakers cannot do this right now, because the technology usually enticed by some effectiveness and money making or some national competitiveness, and then because that's why some negative aspect of the new technology cannot be handled, cannot be addressed very time soon. I want to point out a little bit about this broader perspective, and also European country policymakers, European Union, they told that our AI ethics proposal going to be some kind of the silver bullet to get hold of some advanced country. They make most of ethics to compete with other much more advanced country. That means it's not much some purposeful and effective tool right now. And even though some European country already know, European Commission already suggests some AI space, the risk-based AI regulation is already suggested, but to be implemented is a long way to go. And I traced that kind of the movement for 2 years. And 2 years ago, many people expected, AI governance of the European country is going to be very, very strong, very strict. But right now, it's too much water. It's not strong. It's very weak. And then many lawyers, including Yohai Bank lawyer, Harvard Law School, he blamed that don't allow industry to handle the ethics governance of the AI their own hand. He don't trust some self-regulation like this. But but on the flip side, we don't know that much clear signals, clear evidence of the negative of AI. But for example, nobody has been killed by, not many people has been killed by AI weapons in the war field. Yeah, it's the evidence usually need when lawmakers make law or penalties. Even though they can make it, the much more awful level of the national competitiveness will block this. That's why I suggest that we going to focus on AI algorithmic literacy rather than some practical way right now. Thank you.
Wow, that sounds pretty much like a doomsday, situation
Yeah.
where, I mean, so I did engineering, and I really don't want to imagine a situation where we end up without any regulation. And again, another thing is that we don't want to regulate out of fear. Most of our regulations seem to arise, and we tend to ban regulation, some technologies, their uses, because we are scared. Before we get into, like maybe how do we equip engineers or skill building, like you said, in this area, literacy in this area. Nidhi, how do you view this? There's so much development on the OECD front, and EU also came out with their list. Niti Aayog in India also came out with a handbook. And also another interesting thing is that Mr. Eun Chang also talked about how much data goes into AI, right? And we are looking at data protection laws, like you said, and probably India will soon have one. So that forms sort of a ground, right? Because EU had the data protection law, they had principles, and ultimately this is the data that goes into AI. So how we handle this data is important. And they also have, GDPR also has some automated decision-making provisions on that, right? A little bit, it covers very little bit of AI. And we hope that maybe in India and other countries that they're basically waiting and watching and seeing how these proposals pan out. But ultimately, I see a situation where a company in India will have to export their products to other countries too. So somewhat you'll have to comply by the regulation, and regulation to have more ethical systems, or maybe to abide by developed countries or the countries that already have something in place. So I see a little bit of hope there, but from what Mr. Chang said, it sounds really, really scary to me. How do you view these developments in this context? Do you see there's hope, or?
So I think going in order, I actually really agree with Mr. Eun Chang. So I stopped keeping track last year, but between 2015 and 2020, I think when we were just doing some cursory research, there were 117 organizations that had come up with AI ethics. We can see how useful that turned out. There are maybe 2 or 3 big ones that people more or less refer to. Facebook has their own, Google has their own. I think at some point, like Mr. Eun Chang said, it was just a statement. Everybody was coming up with AI ethics, so everybody else also decided to come up with AI ethics. And you have so many variations of it, it didn't really lead to anything. I think let's see how it's contextualized and if it actually does sort of underpin the way people are framing legal and regulatory challenges. So I guess for that, we'll have to see. I think I can say that I think people can stop making, like releasing AI ethics statements now. I think we've like sort of had enough of those. You actually pointed out a really good sort of problem that we have here. And that is that AI is in fact built on people's data. So you put in place data protection regimes. India is still working on releasing theirs. And when it comes into play, you have like more sort of formalized notice and consent principles, data collection, minimization, accuracy. You'll have all of these, and then you'll have some base level of protection. That's true. To a large extent, I think if we look at, say, regional data protection instruments, like GDPR, a regional instrument, you look at the CARICOM instrument, ASEAN has its own set of data protection principles. They're not super formal, but there are some there. So I think we can expect some degree of, shall we say, like similar levels of protection when you do have your data protection law coming into place, if only because otherwise, I guess, transferring data across borders will become difficult. But the bigger problem that I see here is that even if you have a Personal Data Protection Act into play, what people, or at least a lot of companies now do, is they tout anonymization as some sort of a silver bullet, and they exclude the data from the ambit of personal data. So GDPR also has this problem. Anonymized data doesn't fall within the ambit of the GDPR. So while, like you said, the PDP comes in, there'll be a distinction in there'll be a big change in how AI is governed. I think you'll actually have to wait for a personal data protection bill and some sort of non-personal data protection before you can see any real effective algorithmic governance coming into play. This isn't just for India. I think now a lot of countries are going to have to adapt to this problem of anonymization no longer working. Now that it's been proven that you can in fact de-anonymize data, even if it's been anonymized once. So this is one of the problems that I sort of see coming that a lot of people have to deal with. In addition, and I think finally, you had said something about India exporting AI models. I think that might not be such a bad idea. One of the problems that we have right now is that even out of the 117 set of ethics that we studied, a lot of them disproportionately come from the global north. You don't have a lot of things that are contextualized to the global south. Now, of course, taking an algorithm from one country and blindly applying it to the other one isn't going to work. But it is probably better for global south countries to have some norms or some processes in place that would contextualize an algorithm that they're deploying in their countries to sort of their standards. Even small things like having multiple languages on a platform or something, that will greatly change the kind of ways that you want to regulate algorithms on a platform. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I kind of agree, because India, if you look at India, it's so diverse. It has its own history of discrimination. It could be caste-based discrimination or maybe some regionalistic discrimination. So I guess we'll probably have to study unique cases in India and build that into our...
Exactly. And also the sort of discrimination that you would have is very different. They may not be the same that if, say, you have a system that's been trained in the US to sort of say exclude gender discrimination or racial discrimination, you can't quite apply that the same way in India because you have other factors, bigger factors here that come into play, if in case you want to prevent against caste-based discrimination, or you have problems with language-based discrimination or regional issues. So there is so much distinction that I think one of the more important things is that a lot of the AI, if you want to deploy it, if it's being designed in the global north, you can't quite deploy it in the global south. There's too much contextual difference between these things.
That's right. Yeah. And I think somewhere someone said that, maybe the East or the countries in the, this area in Asia, they should come together and have more conversations. Probably OECD had some, but we also need to start introspecting and, developing our own principles. But again, that again risks, it's a technology after all, which needs to, we understand technology is something that crosses borders. So we obviously want to arrive at a situation where these are universal, they universally agreed. It can be used everywhere. But Mr. Chang, I have a question. So this is very interesting. You said that self-regulation might not be the most amazing solution, but then how? Do you think governments should step in and they could provide some sort of a guidance, overall guidance, and then companies will have to abide by it? But then there are problems with transparency and algorithms. Maybe we don't have solutions, but do you suggest a way ahead? And then we can come to, probably bringing in the practitioners into this fold,
Oh yeah, thanks for asking this. You touched a very good point. The idea suggests some kind of collaborated governance approach. For example, government is not only, lawmakers not only one who can make governance because it's not government law. That's why we use the terminology of the governance. For example, I try to stress some role of the internet users. If AI system has a problem, there's two main factors. First of all, data. The garbage in, garbage out. When they just gather the very full data and then they just use them everywhere, it's going to be very disastrous outcome. And the bias and inaccuracy and so many problems happen. That's why we stress that internet users must ask their own right to the internet companies or any other AI system makers. And I already found that India usually already tried to adopt some European GDPR regulations like South Korea. And as far as I know, Japan already did it, and South Korea already did it. India on the way to adopt GDPR fully, and they have. That's why internet users have the right they have own right to claim their anonymity and their own some pseudonym making, and they try to they can refuse they own be a subject of the automated decision making. That's why I asked that internet users should stress their own protection of the data, and then they try to refuse of the without any consent. They rely on allow of the internet companies to make most of their own data. And secondly, there's some very important factors, AI system design. AI system design is, in other words, is algorithm modeling. Algorithm modeling is sometimes very poor. We just trust some software engineers, but they usually just make a shift from A. They just get the A, and they use A program for the B purpose. There's so many makeshift of software. It's not much some purpose specific development. There's not much things. This if we focus on some asking about some legitimate and fair system of the AI algorithmic modeling, if we ask this, they will look into it again. They will try to make some much more fair, ethical algorithmic system. How can we do this? For example, this system, we recognize that system really they very much not care of the marginalized people. That system really treat the female applicant very badly. We can figure out because we compare some statistics outcomes. This is very important. That's why we need some civil society organizers, civil society activities to really focus on this. As much as we make much more cases, we will have a much more compelling argument. You should change this. If we ask continuously, the government will look into this. And then, as I mentioned, that we need some algorithmic accountability, algorithmic auditability is very important. And then, actually, many companies very sensitive to some public opinion. They do not want to be a target of the social criticism. If there's some raise some issue or concern, and they perceive that if we do not fix this problem, we're going to be facing much more big problem. Yeah. This is consumer choice. This is a very effective one. It's much more effective one more than law, because the law making is kind of the. Did you hear some symbolized legislation? Symbolized legislation is that suggests big motor, big value, and after that, actually that law does not work that more effectively because the penalty is very nominal. Yes. Compensation is very small. It's not much working. Then we do not. I'm a lawyer, but I do not trust that much effectiveness of law because usually lawmaking is complicated with some political advertisement, and then some kind of it's just kind of the naming problem. They just wanted to show, the lawmakers wanted to show up. Oh, I'm doing something for you, but actually it does not.
And we must not forget that a lot of systems are deployed by states only, by the state governments, right? Our India's facial recognition technologies at the airports have nothing to do with consent. They don't take user consent. So if the users are, you're right, if they're educated enough and they question it, there could be some sort of a pushback. And I also completely agree with the point. There's a very important point that you made about communities. I think we saw a lot of action on internet freedom. The kind of action we saw on internet freedom, network neutrality, or even, intermediary responsibilities, that kind of action is missing in emerging technologies, but maybe because it's a little complicated topic. What do you think, Nidhi? Sorry, Mr. Chang, I'll just come back to you.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Sorry. I think I agree with you. I think also it kind of depends upon your community. You are still sort of at this point trying to get people like basic internet and sort of like communication technology awareness. I think the net neutrality incident that you brought up, that's a great sort of explanation, because that's one of the few that really worked, right? Like a lot of people came together, a lot of people actually opposed this, and it went through. So it went to try, and they reaffirmed net neutrality rules. That is sort of the problem. I think the pace of technology right now is at a rate where you can't quite explain everything to everybody in a way that they can meaningfully understand and engage with the topic, and then bring up like some sort of opposition. I still think that there's a lot of people, however, who are looking into this. Every time, like when states put out a policy or a law for comments, there's a lot of people who do send in comments. So I think that's probably like a sort of good step forward. If those comments are, considered and like they're taken into account, then that's probably a good step forward. But I do think that depending upon like the technology that we are having in question, I think it would be a little unrealistic to expect like some huge sort of like an output from the people in the country, especially if it's things like algorithmic. It would take too long to get to the grassroots and explain this problem when people of grassroots clearly have other problems also. So I think given sort of like the technical complexities of this, I do not think that would quite work out. But yeah, once for more basic things as like the right to privacy, which is of course a fundamental right in India, and that's something that people have been now educating people about. I'm hopeful that is something that would have fruit. People do seem to be more aware of the right to privacy. There has been a lot of like good that's come out of privacy jurisprudence. So I think that like slowly we're headed in the sort of correct way. Yeah.
Mr. Eun Chang, I think I cut you off. Nidhi just explained how difficult it will be to explain the usual user, probably the user on ground about literacy. But maybe do you, in your opinion, in your experience, have a good literacy example or some movements or some actions that are already taking place that we should refer to as a best practice?
Oh yeah, people I mentioned about some best practice. I wanted to some serious problem of the face recognition technology a little bit more, because it's Black Lives Matter movement happening in the United States. Many policers and then government officials try to record it, and then many internet companies or device companies try to refuse to allow government use of the face recognition technology. And Amazon already studied, and IBM studied, and Microsoft already studied, and then they joined all together. Why they did? Because civilians and many Black people asked that we try to refuse government authorities try to capture our own faces. Because did you know some kind of some chilling effect? If people aware that government going to capture my face forever, record it forever, they cannot go to the street, and that kind of situation fundamentally undermine some democratic movement, and that's why they asked IT companies, and the IT companies accept this, and then they refuse to provide face recognition technology to their government authorities in the United States. The problem is that in China, it does not happen. In China, if you go to Xinjiang, if they know my own face, they know they can trace everywhere, 24 hours, 7 days. And the much more problem is that if I just make a jaywalk in the street in the red light, they just recognize my face and they just read it. And that means face recognition technology very much closely intertwined with some social rating. If I have some very low rate, I cannot go to the university, prestigious university in China. And then if I do some kind of the very socially benefit work, they just a little bit up scoring my point. Yeah, the face recognition technology is very disastrous because it's scoring, and the scoring on hindering my own social activity forever. This is a surveillance country. This is attractive countries. But India is not. India is democratic country. South Korea is a democratic country. That means adaptability and deployment of the face recognition technology vary everywhere. But how about in South Korea? The problem airport, they usually do that. But and otherwise they have data, but they cannot use them most freely because of many social activities watch about that. Yeah, that means.
Wow, that's actually reminds me that, it has the potential to undo so many of our laws, our freedoms, and, it can become so pervasively, it'll be a pervasive surveillance, I would say, all the time. And probably we have to watch out for what we are saying, what we are doing, always be mindful of that. So that's right. I think we totally need more and more user awareness and maybe more communities around that. Maybe we could move on to question answer session from the, we can take questions from the public. You can please feel free to feed your questions in the chat. I have one here. Divya Tiwari has written, could the speaker suggest measures on how should India develop or modify its infrastructure to mitigate algorithmic biases?
Okay. So I think that one of the primary things that I, at least like so far I can see, is that one of the most important things when you're deploying any sort of emerging technology is to make sure that it's rooted in constitutional values. You already have a right to equality, you have a right to privacy. The point here is to ensure that they are followed. So instead of like having new laws every time a new technology comes out and saying, oh, like let's do X for this and Y for this, it's more important that you have these laws underpinning like your entire system that you're bringing in. So like when you are having, for that matter, if your algorithm has a bias, that is a clear sort of like, that's clear violation of the right to equality. One of the things that I think we came across when we were looking into this was that a lot of AI ethics will have the principle to diversity, inclusiveness, non-discrimination, equality, all of these things. And one of the things that they suggest is that it should work on both sides. So not only should your algorithm not sort of discriminate against anybody, but the team that puts it together should also be inclusive. And that can be one of the checks sort of against algorithmic biases, is to have a more inclusive team developing it in the first place. So if you had like say enough, say, sort of you had enough gender representation, enough like representation, racial representation in the team that's putting these together, I suppose that could probably go some way into mitigating algorithmic biases. In addition to that, like Mr. Eun Chang said, another way is of course to have algorithmic accountability, or to sort of check these algorithms before they are deployed for large scale use. Maybe do that testing before, don't wait till like cases start popping up later to sort of go back and fix those. So these are some of like the ways I think that you could mitigate algorithm biases.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just suggest some approach, if you don't mind. Nidhi, I understand you very deeply interested in some algorithmic bias and gender discrimination, and that's maybe caused by some black box problem, and because totally there's no transparency, because companies do not open their black box that much openly. I suggest that my suggestion is that if we wanted to raise a concern specifically, we need to focus on very specific evidence. For example, if we have some kind of the discrimination, or if some female or some vulnerable people or refugee feel they are vulnerable and they discriminate, they are marginalized by their algorithm, they should find the very specific name of the company and their own evidence of the damage or discrimination. Otherwise, if we don't take this approach, the companies usually say that, oh, AI, broadly speaking, AI is very beneficial for all of them. Well, how can we cope with this? As much as we do not go, as much as we go to the very specific narrowly focused there, a company cannot make a lame excuse. We need to go on very focused. For example, oh, this is not just every algorithm of this A company. We just focus on this A company's A solution, B solution, because this specific solution, which is adopted to some recruitment process or some screening process of the MBA applicant or some undergraduate school applicant, is very much problematic, because one of my friends applied 100 people applied there, but only 3 female has been admitted at university. It's obviously a problem, because only 3%, because not 50%. Yeah, this is very strong evidence and argument. But if we just focus on so many solutions of A company will reply that, oh, broadly speaking, we developed this AI solution for everyone, and ask everyone, how many people don't like this? That means the risk perception is all different. And I tell you very funny statistics. In China, amongst all of the Asian countries, China people have a very lowest risk perception of AI. Where's the in the world, who is the highest risk perception of AI? Who? Could you guess it? Who is this? It's a European country.
Yeah.
Okay. It's very everywhere. That's why we cannot say, generally speaking, if we say AI problem very generally, we definitely defeat it. They definitely overcome, because they say AI is made for everyone. It usually happen. And that's why when it comes to AI ethics and AI governance, so many approaches, and we need, if we make a difference, we need to focus on very specific evidence and very specific field. I can call it a silo approach, maybe.
Yeah, I think we'll have to have some sort of a repository or some effort in evidence collection. I guess that's not happening right now in a very organized manner. Okay, we just have 5 minutes. So quickly, one question to Nidhi. This is specifically for you. What do you have to say about AI integration in the Indian judiciary, specifically in the criminal justice system? Will it be difficult considering the sensitive nature of criminal cases? So maybe Nidhi, if you can just give me 1 minute reply.
Yeah, 1 minute reply. I think everybody has heard about the case of judging recidivism in the US and the bias that came with it, and that's been a big concern. As far as I'm aware, right now, the conversation of applying algorithms on AI in the Indian judiciary is to manage cases. I'm not saying that doesn't mean that there cannot be possibility of bias. You get a date 2 years later as opposed to 2 months later. That's obviously still a problem. But there are ways to sort of mitigate against it if that is put into effect, which I imagine will be considered like having a human in the loop or having some sort of like system when you can challenge these. Yeah, like that's sort of my short answer. It'll be difficult, but if we are going to large scale deploy these things, there's most likely going to be some sort of like a mechanism.
Right. There's also a question which basically actually nobody can answer that really, but it says that how secure are our databases containing our facial recognition and biometric data against foreign cyber intrusions? Is the system different for different organs of the government? Like finance department has a different protection compared to Air Force. Where do we stand in terms of government protecting its own data? So data protection laws and anyone?
I mean, the data protection regime is fairly sort of comprehensive. It has its own sort of authority that comes under it, which is the Data Protection Authority. So there is a fairly sort of robust regime that's being implemented, like that's one plan. As for what is the specific ways in which the individual sort of organs of the government guard its data, I do not think I can really answer. I imagine it's somewhat secure. There are laws, however, if there were breaches of these, there are laws. I know people have asked if there were other countries attacking the country, what would happen? There are some international laws as well, like RCEP and all would still apply even in the case of cyber attacks, there's the talent manual. So there are protections in case of these.
Mr. Chang, Eun Chang, you can probably answer this. Do you think that algorithmic bias is something if not regulated, could harm nations because rivals can use that for fourth or fifth generation warfare, which is already happening at its initial stages. Again, some countries, and India is one of them.
I think it's there's so many layers of risk, but the AI bias or gender discrimination is kind of the little bit lower one because it's inside of country. But when it comes to some little bit higher and much broader risk is that AI war, AI weapons, AI generated machine gun, machine or some drone, it already happened, but it's not open yet. Wow, that's why the regulation I already told that some because of the national competitiveness, lawmakers are reluctant to handle this right now. But when it comes to some gender discrimination inside of country it happened usually by the software or AI system or several companies, we can handle this very quickly. As much as we have evidence or some statistics about that. But much more broader perspective of risk, we need some international agreement. But I look into some how United Nations handle this problem, and then I found that lethal weapon of the autonomous weapons, little functionality of the autonomous weapons. United Nations they just gather the GGE government executive groups, but they do not agree with yet what means lethal autonomous weapon right now. That means if I put this in some economic terms, there are higher transaction cost of the agreement with regard to handling or regulating AI weapons. That's why I suggest that there's so many layers of the AI regulations, and then there's a certain aspect of the regulation. Civil society also move in there, and they make some campaign. They just gather so many students, and then they just instill some kind of the AI literacy. As much as many people raise the issue, the companies will go backward. And then in sum, I just suggest 2 points. AI algorithm problem consists of the 2 aspects. First of all, data, and second is AI system. The AI gathering is a matter of the GDPR, and then we can ask the government to handle very clearly, effectively, and transparently. And then secondly, AI algorithm modeling is a matter of the company, because company usually make it and they sell this to the government authorities or other companies. That's why we make some kind of customer movement. Customer movement or customer complaint can very effectively address this issue. And then that means there's not only one approach, not just government can handle this some internet algorithm governance issue, but so many civil society organizations and individual customers, and there's some coordinated approach of the all some stakeholders will make a good difference. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much. Sorry, I got disconnected for a minute here. So maybe I missed a little bit of conversation, but yeah, I think thank you. I don't want to interrupt because this was very, very helpful to understand AI regulation, and then you said higher order regulation. The question I think was focused on how it can be exploited, the AI discrimination and all can be exploited, for to the disadvantage of a particular country. But I guess, but we're running out of time now, and I think any last statements from both the panelists would be great. So. Please feel forward to give your last comments. Mr. Chang, could you quickly, like in 30 seconds, give a last statement about this, about algorithmic governance?
Yeah. I'm also author of the history of the disinformation war in South Korea. So I found some chatting room. There's somebody the Nidhi Singh. He asked that there's some kind of AI war manipulated by the information was manipulated by AI. Yeah, this is very important. Yeah, I want to focus on this one because in social media we presume that many people, many very bad guys, try to type disinformation or misinformation everywhere, but it's not. It does not. AI generated context. Do you know how much is AI developed very quickly? AI generated art, crypto art. The AI generated so many faces which does not exist in the world, and AI generated so many misinformation, disinformation. The software. If I have some money and if I have some functional AI system, I can spread thousands of the disinformation in 1 hour. That's why we really should concern about it. And then some kind of the I believe that because of Facebook and many Twitters and social medias already acknowledge of this problem, they wanted to detect who is making some mechanically make disinformation. I think it's in India. So many elections happen every day, every year, and that's why. So we need concern. We need laser concern of the disinformation generated by AI, because the AI is content generated online very effectively. They never sleep. They never eat. They just.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Continuously, the AI is a really effective one. That's why we really worry about some AI generated disinformation problem in Asian countries. I already told that so many Asian countries is victimized by the AI dirty algorithm. Thank you.
Thank you. Nidhi, please go next.
Yes. Okay. So I think in 30 seconds, we've discussed a lot about AI. So I think I can just sum up the main sort of regulatory challenges that I see coming up on the deployment of AI, and that would be probably a heightened threshold of responsibility for public sector use of AI, overarching principles that you must base your AI regulatory framework on. You need sectoral regulation to effectively implement AI. Right now, I think we've been talking about it generally, but if you mean to put AI in things like health or banking, then you'll also have to look at sectoral regulators, and there'll be like some sort of an overlap and clash between those. That is something to consider. And most importantly, we need to like look into contextualizing AI systems for like safer development and safer use. So you need to be focusing on sort of both aspects. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to me, and I can probably just answer you in email or chat or however you. Thank you so much, Aditi.
Great. Thank you so. Sorry. I didn't realize I was on mute. Thank you so much for this amazing discussion. It was really insightful. And thank you for your time. We will reach out to you in case we have more questions. I hope you will have the time to answer us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Aditi. Thank you, Nidhi. Thank you, Eun Chang. That was a really insightful session. Thank you so much. We'll be moving on to our next session. Just give me a minute. Yeah.